Reorienting the Gaze is Morgan's exhibition, and it's all about confronting the understanding of the Western view of Eastern art based on this term Orientalism. And what Orientalism is all about is this Western view of Middle Eastern and North African experiences. And they're not always accurate. They're very much a crystallized and stereotypical view of what these individuals' experiences are. And Morgan is really trying to unpack that and bring some of that reality back into our understanding of the art that's being made and these people's individual experiences as they go out through their life. And so in her thesis, as I mentioned before, she's really looking at these textiles and how they play a role, and the designs and the cultural significance of these things within these women's lives on the day-to-day. And so this exhibition is really about not a confrontation, but it's more a juxtaposition of these Western views versus the Eastern realities, which I think is really, really interesting. And before we get into the artworks, I did want to cue you to this really interesting kind of thing that I noticed that I couldn't stop thinking of when I saw this exhibition. It really does prime you to kind of reorient your gaze by starting off with this kind of eyeball shape. You're being looked at, this exhibition is looking at you, and you're really kind of figuring out how to look at the artwork that you're being presented with. So I just thought that was a fun tip to kind of keep in mind as we move forward. And if you do have any questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat. I won't be able to answer them until the end of the talk, but until then, please feel free to drop them as you think of them. I'd love to answer them later. So our first work that we're going to be talking about is really kind of the star of this show. This was kind of Morgan's keynote artwork when thinking about this exhibition, and it's from Iranian artist Shirin Neshat called In Deference. And so this is what's called a diptych, or a two-paneled artwork, and she's really juxtaposing this Iranian woman, this Muslim woman, and this painting by El Greco, a Spanish artist from 1580, called A Noble Man with a Hand on His Chest. So as you can see, these positions directly mirror each other, but in having these aspects be the same, she's really trying to recognize what's different about these works. And this really goes back to Morgan's idea of juxtaposition and non-confrontation, but that reflection of what are we looking at and how does it differ between these two spheres, the Western view versus the Eastern view, and how do they converge or differ in those spaces. So looking at this El Greco painting, Spain was a large colonizer in this view. They did have a lot of Middle Eastern migration into their space. There was this time where Muslims were actually expelled from Spain a little bit before this painting was painted in 1580. And she's really looking at that kind of view of this colonizer versus this Muslim woman, really hoping that we can see how they are similar, but really highlight how they are different in this image. So we've got this as our thing to keep in mind throughout the whole exhibition, keeping this similar versus difference on view. So going into our second work, this is a work by Leila Sadie. It's part of her Harem series, and part of what Sadie is working towards here is this experience of the Western imaginary, which is a term, if you go and watch Morgan's lecture on this exhibition, is brought up a lot because it really encapsulates how Orientalism functioned within Western culture. It's very much about that imagination of what Eastern peoples were doing and how they were existing. And the harem is one of those kind of spaces that are specifically tied to that Western imaginary, where people had these very interesting conceptions of what went on in a harem, this kind of non-European space that they were not allowed into. And Leila Sadie actually has personal experience with this as she grew up in a harem. So she's really thinking about her kind of experience within this space, as well as the women's experiences throughout history and in some cases contemporarily. And she's really using the space and the kind of size of this room to emphasize that historical past, while also using the small figure of the woman that you're seeing here as a kind of blending of these two histories. And in an interesting note, the word harem actually does mean a group of women. So there's this conflation between this architectural space and these women's actual experiences within them. And this woman is kind of meant to blend into this space. As you can see by her textured garment, it really does match the patterning, and this outfit was commissioned particularly for this work for that purpose. So if you are having a hard time seeing her, that is deliberate. She's really trying to work in this image and combine these two ideas of what this harem is to actually kind of put these women's experiences on display. And I'm going to show a detail here. What you can see on this woman's face, hands, and feet is Arabic. And what she's trying to do is give this woman who is voiceless this voice within this work. So even though it is a static image and she can't be seen, or she can't be heard rather, you can see the writing that is on her and be able to kind of, if you can read this, understand what she is trying to say and understand what she is in this space for. But if you can't, that's also a reflection of this kind of outside Western space where you're really trying to place her within it and without it all at the same time. And this 3-panel format, as we had a diptych before, this is known as a triptych. And this work is actually really massive. It is very big. This doesn't give a good sense of its size, but its size is really integral into playing into how we interact with this space and how you're kind of immersed in this space alongside this woman. So that's kind of a way in which these contemporary artists are deconstructing this view of Orientalism and placing it in conversation with these contemporary deconstructions. So our third image also deals with language. This is a work by Hidia Shafi called White, Turquoise, Gold, Yellow, and Blue, 6 colors, to reference the colors used. And this artist's work is very process-based. She hand rolls all of these pieces of paper and dyes or paints them herself. And these pieces of paper are not only significant for the process that go through, as she does all hand roll them and hand make them and hand place them, they're significant in that they're written before they're painted with the Farsi word for love. And this woman is Iranian American, and she is working this language into this artwork and then obscuring it to kind of talk about the issues of accessibility of language and culture as it gets exchanged and as it gets changed, talking about how Orientalism kind of overshadows the actual experiences and what Eastern culture really looks like. So it's that overshadowing, but in her use, her deliberate use of the word love, she's really talking about this transcendence of love across languages and across cultures. So this artwork is this representation of this beautiful, colorful transcendence to really try and make that connection with its viewer. And it's not very well seen here. I could have added a detail for you, but if you look very much in this bottom where my cursor is, she's deliberately left this one slip of paper unrolled, featuring that Farsi word for love to kind of give that message and to orient the person to what they're looking to. And so this is one of probably the most recognizable images that'll be presented today, and you've most definitely seen this on the cover of National Geographic. It's an image by Steve Mccurry, who is an American photographer. It was taken in 1984, and it's most commonly known as the Afghan Girl. The girl in this picture, her name is Sharbat Gula, and she actually did not consent to this picture being taken. Steve Mccurry did take this picture of her and then sent it into the National Geographics, and she didn't even know that she was on the cover of this artwork until 17 years later. At the time this picture was taken, she was a refugee in Pakistan during the refugee crisis in Afghanistan. So she traveled from Afghanistan to Pakistan in the early 80s, I would say. And she was really just trying to survive and live. And later on in her life, when she did find out that this image had the notoriety and the iconic status and the immediate recognizability, she had very mixed emotions about it because it actually caused a lot of issues for her. She was recognized in the image years later, even though she was older, and it actually caused her to be removed from where she was staying in Pakistan because of this situation that was going on. Because they had recognized her from this photo, it actually negatively impacted her on the long term. And what this goes to show, it's kind of this commentary, looking at it through Morgan's lens, of the negative impacts that even unconsciously, Western journalists and American photographers can have on these people's lives when they don't take into consideration the long-term effects or the day-to-day experiences of these people, and how having this image be known of her could have affected her down the line. He probably really saw the opportunity, Steve Mccurry, to crystallize this Afghanistan refugee crisis into one singular image of this woman, and he wasn't thinking about the woman behind the picture, which in and of itself is the issue that Morgan is trying to get at, where we're confronting our views of Orientalism and what this woman might represent from a non-informed view versus the actuality of this woman's lived experience and her experience as a refugee and leaving her home. So it is a very powerful and iconic image, but I would ask that you take this lens, you take this iconic image with a grain of salt, now knowing what you do. And so we're going to kind of close here. On this image, it's a still from a video taken by Isaac Julian in 2013, and he is a British videographer. And Morgan, in her lecture, takes this image, and she is talking about how it does play into these negative stereotypes. It's, again, like the Steve Mccurry photograph, kind of essentializing this experience or this aesthetic view of an Eastern culture. You have this woman, this Filipino maid, who's walking across the desert, figuratively, in the city of Dubai, all the way off in the distance there that you can barely see. She does work in the city, so she was chosen to represent that sort of working experience, both outside and inside of this Middle Eastern city, or North African rather. And it's really looking at this expanse, not only this potentially hostile environment, but also this beauty. And so it's got this double meaning of you're looking out into this expanse and you are seeing all of these things and this opportunity of Dubai off in the distance, but you're separated by this kind of representation through Morgan's lens of Orientalism and this land that has to be crossed in order to reach this opportunity, or to this true experience rather. And so what I would like to encourage you to do as we kind of close out our tour is to really, like the Steve Mccurry image, take it with a grain of salt. I would hesitate to place you in the same place as the Filipino maid, as the lived experiences are very different there, but I would encourage that you do in fact think about yourself as entering into this new sphere of knowledge, this kind of understanding of what contemporary Iranian, American, and Moroccan artists are doing with the Western view of the Middle Eastern and North African lived experience, and really kind of use that to interrogate what you're seeing around you and how you can bring those lived experiences more fully to the surface, rather than going off of what you might have seen and what you might think, and those potential stereotypes that you might bring that have been kind of fed to the Western public over time. And so that's pretty much what I've got for today. And I really want to encourage you to, if you can, see this exhibition in person. It's a really lovely experience. It goes deeper into the history of Orientalism than I was able to here. Also watch Morgan's lecture. It's really well done. And she does give that sort of, not only the view into what she was thinking about in putting together this experience and how it aligned with her thesis, but also that deeper inner working of how she chose these artworks and how they came together to form this beautiful exhibition. So I do encourage you, if you can't see it physically, to do it virtually via Morgan's lecture or through the images we have on CFAM's website. And again, if this is your first time joining us, thank you so much. This was my first time too. I'm so excited to have this opportunity to do this.